part of this because I'm not the tallest person in the world. Some of you may have noticed that. And if I sit down, I think I'm lost to at least half of you. I will have completely disappeared. So maybe I'll begin by standing, and when we do some meditation exercises, which will come in the middle of this, then maybe I'll sit down for that. Is that okay? So I'm going to begin by giving a definition of compassion. Basically what I'm going to do in my talk is talk about compassion, its relation to wisdom, and also what wisdom means in this context, its association with other qualities which are essential for social service and working for social change, why it is that we are not abiding in stable, powerful compassion and wisdom all the time. Why does that seem not to be happening for most of us? What is it that's impeding our capacity for compassion and wisdom? What is it that brings out that capacity and helps us to stabilize in this capacity for compassion and wisdom? And I'm going to be speaking, there's no way to talk about or from Buddhism just in general. You have to be speaking from some part of it and some perspective. So I'm going to be speaking from within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, Tibetan Buddhism, and within a certain stream of it, which Bhikkhu Bodhi mentioned, the Nyingma Khargyu stream, which is also called Dzogchen tradition. So all you need to know is it's a part of Tibetan Buddhism, but much of what I'm going to say is shared in common with other Buddhist traditions, and will also begin to overlap with modern investigations in neuroscience, cognitive science, developmental psychology, and social psychology. So I'm not going to actually cover all that, but I'll broach it. It will come up, and feel free to ask about it further. So first I'm going to give you a definition of compassion from within Tibetan Buddhism, which is largely shared, I think, with the other Buddhist traditions. Compassion is a loving, empathic concern. Empathetic. So compassion is a loving, empathetic concern for beings who are suffering, which wishes them to be free of the suffering and deeply well. Is that clear? I think that's basically accords with most of Buddhism, and it's the first. I would just want to go through the 5 aspects of compassion implied in the definition I just gave. Should I just repeat the definition? Okay. I notice some of you are taking notes. When in that situation, I tend to panic. Oh no, he's going on. So out of empathic concern for that possibility in some of you, I will repeat the definition. Compassion is a loving, empathic concern for beings who are suffering, which wishes them to be free of the suffering and deeply well. So there are 5 aspects I want to draw out from that definition. One is loving affection. Loving affection. Can you all hear me okay? Which senses beings or persons. The reason I say beings is because compassion is directed not only at human beings, certainly at human beings, but also all living creatures, all beings with feelings. So sometimes I'll say beings, sometimes I'll say persons, with the inclusive sense that it includes all beings who feel. So the first aspect of compassion is loving affection, which senses beings as dear and worthy of unconditional regard, that is, beyond self-concerned, reductive thoughts of them, and which takes joy in them and wishes them deeply well. That's loving affection. The qualities of love or loving affection are like those of a loving parent, which is often the comparison in Buddhist traditions. A loving parent, her affectionate resonance with, unconditional regard for, joy in, and positive wishes for her child. Contemplative or meditative practices, like those within Buddhism, can help evoke strengthen and stabilize the capacity in each of us to have that sort of loving connection with many others, not only with our own child. The second aspect or element of compassion, as I mentioned in the definition, is empathic concern, empathetic concern or care. So notice the logic of what I'm going through. We begin with loving affection. When we have loving affection for someone, then when feeling that loving affection for them, if we become aware that they are suffering, we sense their suffering as similar to our own and feel what it must be like for them, giving rise to empathic concern. That's empathic concern. So it's not merely feeling what it must be like for them, it's loving affection. So within the loving affection for them, then seeing or sensing what they're going through, then feeling empathy for them, which is connected to that loving affection. It's not a cold, distant knowledge of what you're going through, but I don't care. That's empathic concern. And that leads to the third aspect of compassion, which is the wish, the explicit wish for beings to be deeply free of suffering. That is, from that loving empathic concern flows the wish for them to be free of the suffering so they may be deeply well. When such loving empathic concern becomes strong, that wish for their freedom from suffering and so they may be deeply well, that wish becomes an urge to help alleviate their suffering. So these are all components of compassion within Buddhist understanding, which are now also coming into cognitive science for investigation. The fourth aspect of compassion, then, is action motivated by that urge to alleviate their suffering. Action that creatively responds to their needs. The fifth aspect of compassion, which is implied in the prior four steps. The prior four steps are loving affection, empathic concern for them and their sufferings, the wish and urge to help alleviate their suffering, then compassionate action to help alleviate their suffering. Now, this fifth aspect is implied in all of them, is active within all of them, and that is wisdom. That is, in the four aspects I just described, there's a kind of wisdom operative. So what is the nature of that wisdom? The wisdom that is operative in such loving compassion is the awareness that our own self-focused, self-concerned, reductive thoughts and feelings of others, like, you are my friend, that's who you are, so don't spend so much time with these other people, you're mine, or this person is annoying. That's who she is, actually. She's the annoying one, and so forth. That's what I mean by self-concerned, reductive thoughts of others. The wisdom that is operating in loving compassion is the awareness that our own self-concerned, reductive thoughts and feelings of others do not capture their much fuller reality. It's the awareness that our own very narrow, limiting perceptions and thoughts of others are not them. Does not capture them. They are much more than that. That's a wisdom. Such wisdom knows this, knows that our own limiting thoughts of others are not them and do not actually capture their fuller reality. Such wisdom knows this by sensing their fuller personhood, beyond reductive thoughts of them, their fuller being. So what is this fuller personhood that wisdom senses that becomes loving affection for them and empathic concern? What is this fuller personhood or fuller being that isn't just my familiar thought of him or her? A person's fuller personhood, which is beyond reductive thoughts of her, includes her capacity for life-giving qualities, such as love, compassion, discernment, creativity, joy, and courage, to name a few. Her fuller personhood also includes her struggles throughout life, and her wish, like one's own wish, to be deeply well and not to suffer. That is all part of her fuller personhood. That is what is not captured by the thought of this other person as merely in my way. I'm waiting in line on the turnpike, and this person cut in front of me. They are merely annoying. You see what I mean? That reductive thought, that's the fuller personhood that reductive thought does not catch. It is that fuller personhood of persons that's sensed by wisdom that evokes our affection and compassion for them in the other aspects I listed. Sensing more of them than our limiting thoughts declare them to be. That definition of wisdom is beginning to move in the direction of what becomes really profound wisdom in a Buddhist understanding. And yet I don't have to take it all the way to the profoundest Buddhist understandings of wisdom. It can remain at the level I just described for our purposes here now and for cognitive science. We don't have to go all the way to transcendental wisdom, directly perceiving the impermanent, non-self, empty nature of beings and phenomena. I'm not going into all that. Don't have to go into all that. We can also have a level of wisdom which is more conventional or mundane, which is operative, always operative, if we're feeling loving affection and compassion for someone. The aspects of compassion that I just described are increasingly now coming under the study and investigation of cognitive science, neuroscience, developmental psychology, and social psychology, looking into and actually beginning to trace out the patterns within the brain that correlate with these attitudes and states of mind. Also beginning to investigate the possibility, which of course Buddhist traditions and other world traditions have long affirmed, that we can cultivate, deepen, strengthen these kinds of attitudes through meditation or contemplative disciplines. That's now being studied also in neuropsychology. And in developmental psychology, the way in which these kinds of qualities of loving compassion become part of the development of a mature human being, and when they are present in the environment of a young child, how that helps to empower or strengthen the capacity of the child to mature into a human being who knows what love and compassion are like and can also extend and share love and compassion with others. This is also a focus of developmental and social psychology now. With such loving compassion and wisdom come other associated qualities that are important for all of us, and particularly important for those who work in social service or work for social change or social justice. Qualities that empower us for such work, that help make such work meaningful, relatively joyful, rather than burning us out and making us angrier and angrier at all the people in our way or who are not cooperating. So there are certain qualities associated with love and compassion that are rather critical for people in social service of all kinds, which includes healthcare and therapy and counseling and ministry and teaching and education and so forth, and working with the sick and the homeless and the dying and so on, or working for social change and standing up for the homeless and the hungry and so on. Strong compassion for self and others brings a power of inner healing, which is necessary both to avoid burnout and to be a healing presence for others. We may wish to be a healing presence for others in working with them and for them, or for and within communities. We want to be a healing presence. We cannot be a healing presence unless there's a tremendous amount of inner healing that occurs, which expresses itself in a way of being present to others, which is a healing way of being with them. Is that clear? This is an argument coming out of Buddhist philosophy. I'll sort of locate where my arguments are coming from. You don't have to believe everything I'm saying, but there are going to be arguments like that coming out. Strong compassion for self and others connects us, as I said, to the fuller reality and fuller personhood of people beyond our own limiting thoughts of them. our own limiting perceptions and feelings of them. In other words, strong love and compassion are a principle that connects us and puts us in touch with reality. Without strong love and compassion, by definition, we are out of touch with reality. To the degree that we abide in strong love and compassion for each person and each being, to that degree we are in touch with reality, according to Buddhist philosophy. To the degree that we are not abiding in that, we are out of touch with reality. It's pretty radical. That's Buddhist philosophy, just so you know. Cognitive science hasn't yet come up to that, but someday I think they will. By being more fully in touch with others in their fuller reality, their fuller humanity or personhood, we are automatically more fully present to them. So you can listen to this part with the ear of somebody in service or work for social change or social justice. We become more fully present to them, and that means that we're listening more fully, we're sensing them more deeply, we're discerning their hidden strengths that otherwise we'd be lost to. The quality of love and compassion is affectionate for, interested in, curious about. It is paying attention, it's discerning. It wishes to know the other as they are, more and more and more fully. It's that quality of attention that is, of course, foundational for any doctor in diagnosis, for any healthcare giver, for any therapist, for any counselor, right? We cannot have those qualities so essential for service and social change work. We cannot have them except to the degree that we are learning to abide in an increasingly stable and grounded, loving affection and compassion. The two go together. So what is it that holds us back from fuller loving affection and compassion, which comes with such associated qualities? I think if we're honest with ourselves, we don't feel like we're abiding at that level much of the time. We're reacting. We're lost in our reactions. We are getting burnout, many of us. We are going off into our frustrations. We are significantly lost from each other, more than we may be fully conscious of. But we can measure that lostness from each other by the quality of our presence to each other, the extent to which we're not paying as full an attention as what was just described. And I'm not just talking about all of you. Oh, you people are bad. I'm talking about me. Just, this seems to be how it is for us human beings. So if you're anything like me as a human being, that's how it is. We are largely lost from this. We do, of course, feel it. We do come into very meaningful moments of loving and empathic connection with others. Of course we do. But those are passing moments. And much of the rest of the time, that's not where we're living. So what is it that's holding us back from this potential or capacity of loving compassion? And what is it that can bring it out in us? So I'm going to tell you a quick story. I hope you like stories. So this is a true story, actually. It appeared in a literary journal called The Sun several years ago, and it was written by a nurse in Massachusetts named Lucy, and she was describing her experience. Are you ready? Okay. So now, these are Lucy's words. She's a veteran nurse in a hospital, and she's describing the day when a new nurse appeared on her unit. She's the veteran nurse in charge of the unit. So she writes, "I thought I was having a pretty good day at work. I knew what to do for my patients, and they seemed appreciative. My hair was behaving. I wasn't eating too much chocolate that day. I was treating everyone with kindness. Everyone except the new nurse. She just rubbed me the wrong way with her sad, insecure smile. She was a little too eager, too needy. You know what I mean. That evening, I overheard the new nurse talking about her struggle to become pregnant. She finally had a child at the age of 39, she told the listener, but the little girl had needed heart surgery, and they had lost her to an infection. By that time, premature menopause had ended the nurse's hope for another child. Sheepishly, I asked the new nurse what her baby's name was. Her face lit up with a mother's love. Rebecca, she would be 5 next month. She pulled out a photograph of a beautiful, bright-eyed little girl. My heart ached with shame and sadness and awe. Thank you, I said. What I meant was, thank you for teaching me how much I have to learn. It's a veteran nurse. His final remark. Just by overhearing the new nurse tell her story, Lucy, the veteran nurse's self-protective world collapses to reveal the much fuller reality of the human being before her, the fuller humanity, the fuller personhood. A person of great fundamental goodness who has undergone much suffering. And her natural response is awe, as she says, using her words, awe, connoting deep reverence, sadness, connoting compassion, and shame at her own prior tunnel vision, her own mistaking her reductive thoughts for the person. But what was revealed to Lucy in that moment is not just another person, but also Lucy's own capacity to know and respond from the depth of her being to another person in her depth. Her own capacity to know another person in their fuller depth and to respond to that depth. That's Lucy's depth. That was also revealed. And that capacity was already present in Lucy. It was waiting to come out. Covered over, hidden, impeded by her patterns, her habits of reductive thought and feeling. I want to draw from a Tibetan Buddhist understanding of this. I'm going to give a quick Tibetan Buddhist commentary on this, but what I say will have much in common with other Buddhist traditions as well. That is, a way to understand this story, one way, is to understand that what it's telling us is that everyone is the new nurse. Everyone is the new nurse. And everyone in this room is that new nurse. Everyone in this room has already been covered over by our reductive thoughts of each other. The strangers, the one I know, the one who seems worthy of respect, the ones who don't seem to matter that much. Everyone's already been covered over by our reductive thoughts. Everyone in the room is already a fuller person, vast, mysterious, infinitely vaster, fuller being than our reductive thoughts have already shown up, that our reductive thoughts have already been hiding from us, even upon walking in the room, or any room. That is, everyone in this room is the new nurse in the sense that everyone properly seen would be viewed with reverence and loving compassion. To the degree that we're properly seeing each person in this room, we are viewing them with absolute reverence and loving compassion. To the degree that we are not, we are not. Is that clear so far? This is Buddhist epistemology. But our socially conditioned habit of mistaking our own ego-centered thoughts of people for the people hides their fuller reality. And each of us is also Lucy, just waiting for something to cut through our limiting perceptions so we can be returned to our depth, to our fuller humanity, and sense others in their fuller humanity, and respond with reverence and loving compassion from there. In the story, something interrupted the web of Lucy's reductive thoughts and feelings. Something decisively interrupted it in the moment, suddenly revealing the fuller humanity of herself and others and drawing out her fuller potential. In several Tibetan Buddhist and Zen traditions, it is taught, and other Buddhist traditions as well, it is taught that human beings have an innate capacity, a tremendous innate capacity, to be much more fully present to self and others, like what happened to Lucy, to sense people past our own limiting perceptions of them as deeply worthy. And although our usual patterns of reductive thinking and feeling impede those capacities, when those patterns are decisively interrupted in a moment of deep human connection, as with Lucy, or by a contemplative discipline, such as deep prayer or meditation, we can be pulled back into our deeper ground of knowing and responding. So how to be drawn back to our deeper ground, our fuller capacity to know others in their fuller being, not just when something happens to jar us momentarily awake, but as an ongoing process, not just as a passing feeling that may happen upon us, but as a growing power in our lives with increasing stability. How could that happen for us? That is what a daily contemplative discipline is for, such as daily deep prayer or meditation within this framework. So over the past 13 years, what I've been doing, and also others who have been helping me, is exploring ways of drawing understandings and modes of practice from Tibetan meditation theory, Tibetan meditation traditions, and trying to meditation traditions of compassion and wisdom along the lines I just described, and trying to take elements of them and make them as accessible as possible for a wider and wider world. For Buddhists, certainly, trying to make principles and practices of compassion and wisdom and contemplative disciplines more and more accessible, particularly for Western Buddhists, but by no means just for Buddhists. For people from any background or faith, can these principles and modes of practice be adapted from, in this case, Tibetan Buddhism, in a way that could be really accessible for people from any background? And in that way, perhaps help several things to happen. One, help Western Buddhists to access more of the power of compassion and wisdom that their own Buddhist traditions are entering them into, but making the principles of their own traditions increasingly accessible in a way that could really begin to realize in their own experience more and more. That's one. Secondly, for people of other religious traditions or other forms of spiritual formation that are not Buddhist, could something be provided for them that becomes a really deepening learning from Buddhism that shines new light, breaks open, illumines part of their own spiritual formation, their own tradition, as Jews and Christians, Hindus, Muslims, and others, African religious traditions, all kinds of traditions, pointing back into their own formation, highlighting it, energizing it, so that they are gaining, receiving something from Buddhism, which is not merely tolerating the religious other, but can receive something from Buddhism that opens part of their own religious life in a fresh way that's meaningful for them. And if they speak from that place at a workshop or meditation retreat where I'm teaching or others who work with me teach, then we in turn can learn from them similarly. They've arrived at some deep place as a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim and speak from that place, and if we receive it deeply enough, it will shift our own understanding as Buddhists. Is that clear? So the second purpose was for deep interreligious learning that goes way beyond tolerance into mutual appreciation and mutual tutoring almost in our human possibilities. The third purpose is for social service, people who, in all kinds of social service professions, as I mentioned, and also people who work for social justice and social change and for the environment, which are very fraught fields of activity in which there's much struggle and disagreement, and people are committed to ideological positions and see each other through the lens of the ideologies. And we all tend to lose the fuller humanity of everyone involved amidst all these enemies who are working against us as we're trying to, for example, protect the environment or help improve education in urban centers and so forth. And yet so many forces are raised against us, whoever the us is. It can be hard to be in touch with the fuller humanity of everyone involved in a way that also protects us as people working for social change or social justice, that helps heal our tendencies toward burnout, that protects us and our own fuller humanity. It's hard to stay in touch with, at that level, with people as people on all sides of an issue, isn't it? So that's another purpose in adapting meditation theory and practice on compassion and wisdom, in this case from Tibetan Buddhism, but it can also be done, of course, from the other traditions, and is being done as well. Okay, so what does this meditation training involve? As noted, part of what is impeding our capacity of loving connection and compassion is our habit of constantly mistaking our reductive thoughts of ourselves and others for the people. Again, just look around the room. Actually do that a little bit, if you'd like, right? Who are these people? You might notice, oh, well, this one over here looks really nice to me. It's a little mysterious why. Maybe she reminds me of my mother, or maybe because she doesn't remind me of my mother, whatever it is. This one looks so nice. This one, oh, I don't know. I just don't like that. This is the one I would walk up to during a break and want to learn about. This is these ones. This one I definitely would not want to, and I'm not actually pointing to anybody. And then these others, majority of the room, don't matter, do not matter. You see. Check it out. Walking out on the street in Boston, where I come from, or wherever you are coming from, walk out on the street, crowded. It's just a bunch of strangers, just strangers. Oh, suddenly some close friend appears. Now the one who matters has appeared. Oh, Julie, great to see you. Everybody else is like a block of wood. They don't matter, they barely exist. You see. Now this is a problem. We're constantly mistaking our own reductive thoughts. If somebody is relevant to me and my apparent needs and concerns and desires and wishes, my agenda for life, if someone seems to be very relevant to that in a positive sense, very supportive in some way, then I tend to like them. They're my friend. And then if somebody seems to be undercutting that in some way, even just by the way they look, I need to see someone very young to help me feel more alive, and there's an older person in my line of sight. It could be as superficial and quick as that. So we mistake our own reductive thought and associated feeling for the person, and we're doing it almost all the time. This is a big problem. This is part of what's meant by samsara. We're reacting to our own images of each other, not knowing each other. You following me so far? You don't have to agree with it all, but just following the logic. This is a huge impediment to this kind of very grounded, stable, authentic, deeply connected, loving affection and compassion that's sensing more of the fuller humanity or personhood. That's really held back by this almost constant tendency to mistake our own label for everyone for the actual being. So the kind of compassion training that I've been exploring, drawing from principles of compassion and wisdom from Tibetan Buddhism, is basically it empowers the meditator's capacity for love and compassion by helping her to begin to experience her own fuller personhood and also that of others, to experience what it's like for someone in a moment when someone else was present to her in her fuller personhood. Someone was present to her, seeing more in her than just their limiting thought, seeing her in her potential. Recalling a moment like that is a moment of connection. Oh, that's what it's like for someone to recognize me, that there's more to me than just their latest thought of me, to really be present to me in a kind of a loving or affectionate or resonating, taking joy in, wishing well, joking with, laughing together, listening deeply. Any little moment like that is a moment when someone's relating to us in our fuller personhood. To bring a moment like that to mind is an automatic moment of connecting to a fuller personhood in the other person, relating to that in me, than our latest reductive thoughts of each other. So this kind of training brings out that possibility. It introduces that possibility. Or to sum this up, I'm going to lead us into a quick meditation exercise. So now to introduce our meditation exercise is sort of summing up some of what's been said. From this perspective, and this is starting to line up also with developmental psychology, but I'm actually still speaking as a Buddhist. But you can hear it from also the ear of developmental psychology for a moment. We are introduced to our fuller personhood. That is, our fuller capacity as a human being for love and compassion and discernment and creativity and joy and courage and on, this vast human capacity. We're introduced to that fuller personhood by others who see it in us, take joy in the basic goodness of our being, who wish us well and thereby help us to notice the potential that they see in us. Enter us into a process where we have the opportunity to acknowledge what they're seeing in us, to allow them, to not fight them off, to allow them to commune with us in that way, to accept the fact that they're seeing more in me than I yet see in me. To acknowledge that potential and to learn to inhabit that potential, to accept it and to learn to inhabit it. And this empowers our ability, similarly, to appreciate the fuller personhood in others, to relate to them and their underlying potential, and in that way help them to notice what we see and love and take joy in them, beyond what they may yet see in themselves. Those of you who are older adults like me, this can click into clarity by thinking about a young person, often, for example, an adolescent, who may be going through a phase of her life or his life when they just feel overwhelmed, and certainly don't feel like they are great human beings with vast potential and tremendous possibility. And they need an adult there, not necessarily to tell them that in those words, because the adolescent would just say, oh, forget this. I don't believe you. Stop spouting cliches at me. What they need is someone to see it in them, to recognize they have that potential, to relate to that potential in them, not just talk about it. And if somebody does that for such an adolescent, just as an example, it could actually be any stage of anyone's life, there's something being communicated that's quite foundational in opening a possibility for that other human being, that adolescent, to come into recognition of their fuller potential, their fuller possibility. Even if not at that moment, later in life they may remember that moment, and that's also going to be part of our meditation exercise. So this becomes the structure of what, in the example kind of training that I'm talking about, it's just going through it as a kind of it doesn't mean that this is the only way to train in compassion and wisdom, but it's an example kind of a training, and the principles involved are very similar to other Buddhist traditions and can also lend themselves to discussion. But within the structure of this training, which I call innate compassion training, because it has an emphasis on our innate potential being immediately, in a sense, being immediately accessed in the moment, like with the story about Lucy and the new nurse, it was instantaneous. Similarly, our capacity to connect or realize that we are being connected to in that way is instantaneous and innate and ready to come out. So the structure of innate compassion training then follows the structure of what I just described by bringing to mind what in this training we call benefactors. Those are people who are like that in a moment of loving connection. Benefactors who help evoke our potential to receive and to extend love and compassion in this way. Not to get into it right now because I want to lead a meditation exercise, but just if somebody is wondering, so what part of Tibetan Buddhism is this benefactor practice coming from, which I'm about to lead? It has to do with the parts of Tibetan Buddhism which are also very prominent in other Buddhist traditions in East Asia, of learning to inhabit a kind of a space in which we realize that there's profound spiritual beings are lovingly communing with us. In Buddhist traditions, that's the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, or Amitabha Buddha, like one of the statues in the Great Buddha Hall. Part of how Asian Buddhists, or especially East Asian and Tibetan Buddhists, have related to the notion of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas is that they are beings who have awakened to the kind of potential I just described to its fullest extent, which means that they're holding all of us in this field of absolute love and compassion. Now, in adapting that practice here into the West, it can't be introduced for people of all different backgrounds and faiths as now imagine before you great Buddhas and Bodhisattvas like the ones in the Great Buddha Hall up there. That doesn't work in this culture. It's not the way to begin anyway. But there is another way, which is also drawing on the very same principle, and that has to do with finding a moment in our own life. So are you all game? Shall we do a little meditation exercise? It won't be too long. We can begin to get into the spirit of the meditation just by taking a few deep breaths at your own pace. So you can inhale a deep breath, imagining that you're taking the breath into the depth of your abdomen, and just hold it for a few moments. And as you exhale, imagine that you're just, by the exhale, clearing the mind of all your worries. Just imagine that's happening. So inhale deep into the abdomen, hold for a little while at your own pace, just a little while. When you feel the need, just release, exhale, and imagine that all your worries and anxieties are cleared away with the exhale. And then repeat again, several times. And now just breathe normally. And still drawing the breath into the abdomen, but not holding. And just relax to whatever extent you can. Now with your eyes either closed or just slightly open, looking down. Try to think of a moment any time during your life, perhaps when you were younger, with someone that you really liked to be near. someone with whom you felt happy and well and safe and loved. Just a moment like that with someone. It may be a dear relative or a teacher in your school. It might have been a camp counselor, a mentor, someone a little older, friend of your parents, even a stranger, just in a moment of loving connection. A moment perhaps when someone just took joy in you, maybe playing a game or joking, laughing with you as a child or sometime. Just a moment with someone somewhere that makes you happy to recall. And then fix your mind on that moment. You're not looking for a perfect person who's always loving, etc. Forget that. You probably won't find that. But just a moment. If it makes you happy to think of that moment with that person, then that's the substance to begin the meditation. And now just imagine that that person is present to you now in that way, that that moment is now. And imagine they are communing with you in the goodness of your very being. Beyond all limiting perception of you, communing with you in the goodness of your very being, wishing you deeply well. Very relaxed, just feeling the happiness of holding them in mind. And explore just opening to that, allowing it, just accepting it, to whatever extent you can. Letting them commune with you in the depth of your being, just wishing you deeply well, totally. And just exploring, accepting it, allowing that. And as in any meditation, when the mind becomes distracted, you just gently bring it back to the instruction. Recall your benefactor moment. That moment is now. And just deeply accepting that loving wish and energy to whatever extent you can right now. Now just relax into that feeling of loving energy and kindness without holding on to the vision of your benefactor or holding on to really anything. Just let go into that feeling, dropping all of the frameworks in your mind and just letting the mind fall totally open. With all senses wide open. Just letting all be. Letting all the thoughts and feelings and sensations that arise just arise within this compassionate space of deep acceptance and allowing. Just letting all be. Gong. That's a human gong. Gong. So take your time and come up for air at your own pace. And I'll say one more thing and then we'll have some a little discussion, okay? So I mentioned that one impediment to our cultivating or our experiencing very strong and stable love and compassion, one impediment is our tendency to mistake our own limiting thoughts of persons for the persons. That, of course, begins with ourselves. We mistake our own limiting thought of ourself, the current limiting thought, as our very self. When we do that, we also automatically mistake our limiting thoughts of others for them. We're caught. What can cut through that web? So in the meditation exercise we just did, that's one way of providing an opportunity in which that web of limiting perception is momentarily cut. How? By learning to ignore our own reductive thoughts of ourselves, first of all. By learning instead to rely on, abide in, loving connection. The loving connection in which, in that moment, we are seen in our fuller being. So as the meditation instruction was given, just explore. I didn't say, you people, you should now, okay, here you are, you have your moment. That moment is now. Your benefactor is communing with you in the goodness of your very being. Now, open to that. Accept that. You can't command it. You can't order it. What you can say is, now, we can explore the possibility. We can explore the possibility of opening. We can explore the possibility of accepting this. Accepting that you are being viewed in the goodness of your very being, which is beyond all limiting perceptions, which is beyond all judging. That you are being seen in your being, not in that web of reductive, mistaken thought. We're not used to that. We're not used to focusing attention on that. So it needs to be a very gentle instruction. What is the instruction? Well, explore the possibility of just opening to that, just accepting it. To the degree that someone begins to learn to do that, and it is a learning, because as I said, we're used to accepting our own reductive thought of ourselves as our very self. We're not used to this. So to the degree that we actually learn to open to, accept, acknowledge that we are loved, that is happening right now. It is an experience right now. It is not theoretical. It is not abstract. You are loved in your very being. To the degree that we accept that, we are accepting that in us, which is loved, our fuller humanity, our deeper personhood, our fuller potential. That's why it's a real learning. It's a learning for many of us to learn to accept that we have that kind of vast potential and goodness given in our very being. That's a learning. But it's a critical learning. Someone I know would be ready to raise their hand right now and say, but this is all about me, and this is supposed to be about learning to help others and compassion for others. So if I turn my attention to me, isn't that being very selfish? But the problem is, it's not so easy for us also to be in touch with the fuller personhood of others. As long as we're caught in our reductive labels and images of self and others, we are not in touch with our fuller personhood. And it is the fuller person, as in the story of Lucy, it is our own fuller personhood, our own underlying capacity, to the degree that we return to it. It is that which knows the fuller personhood in humanity and others. We cannot relate to others with a very powerful and stable kind of loving affection and compassion and so forth, while lost in our images, our own reductive images of them. We can certainly believe that we are relating to them with love and affection and compassion. We can be trying really hard to do so, and we tend to burn out. We tend to burn out because we are caught in our own web or field of reductive thought, feeling, and reaction, and we don't know how to get out of it. But I really want to help, I really want to help, I really want to help, but there's a lot of other baggage interwoven in our desire to help. Like I really, really want to help, and I really want to get it done on my terms and on my schedule, and also she's suffering and I don't want her to suffer, so I really, really want to help her, but maybe it's my aversion to her suffering that I really want to get rid of. So in the name of helping, I want her frenetically, I'm trying to help and help and help, but it isn't really compassion for her. It's a desire to get rid of my own feelings, my own suffering feelings of having to be around somebody who's suffering. And so it's very complicated, isn't it? To actually work with and for and serve. We're caught. We are caught. So we need a way to cut through And that which has the power to cut through is the very power that we're seeking. And that's the power of loving affection, connection, and compassion. And that has already been disclosed to us, and it doesn't require beginning with Buddhas and Bodhisattvas on high, although that could be an enormously powerful practice for those who enter into that, I do believe. Nevertheless, we've all been introduced in this sense to the reality of loving connection and compassion. There have been thousands of little moments, like whatever moment you may have found, thousands. And most of them have never come to our cognitive recognition. Little moments when perhaps when we were a small child and an adult in our horizon was smiling upon us, or the adults who built the playground we were playing on out of love for the children in their neighborhood, and on and on and on. The elderly woman or man sitting on the bench as you walk by with your children who smile upon your family, obviously just wishing you deeply well. How glad that you exist. Thousands and thousands of moments like that. Even the clerk at the checkout counter who says, I hope you have a good day. And you can sense that in that moment it wasn't just a cliche, and she meant it. But are we willing to notice? So are we willing to explore the possibility of opening to it, of accepting it, of allowing it, of knowing it, and knowing what it is that is relating to in us, which is our underlying capacity similarly for such loving connection, recognition, compassion, discernment. So this is a profound entry into practice. I'm drawing from devotional traditions within East Asian and Tibetan Buddhism, but we can access it right from within our own lives. So the response to the question, but aren't we supposed to just be thinking about others? Isn't that what compassion is about? We shouldn't be directing any attention to ourselves. But this is a very profound way that people through the centuries have found that the more of themselves that needs to be drawn on to know the more in others can be introduced to us. Is that clear? Another related impediment, and this is the further point I was going to make before we discuss a little bit, is to strengthening love and compassion, is the feeling of self-dislike, self-loathing, unworthiness that is so common in our society. I think in the West in general, certainly in the United States. That is, many of you may have found this exercise we just did not immediately easy, and perhaps because, I'd invite you to investigate, because there's an underlying self-image of unworthiness. I'm not supposed to be receiving this kind of unconditional and affectionate regard. That's not what I am. If anyone's giving me that kind of unconditional regard, they don't really know me. What I am is really not good. Is that clear? Okay, so I don't know about you Asians in the room, but for many Westerners, this is huge. This is huge. And it may have shown up in the exercise we just did as, no, I'm just not comfortable with this. I won't do it. Even as gently as it was instructed. Just explore the possibility of just opening to it or just accepting it. No, I won't. Some may have had that reaction. That's very common and normal, especially in our society. But the problem is that our images and feelings of dislike for ourselves color all of our images and feelings of others, inhibiting our ability to relate to others much more open-heartedly, much more simply. So the exercise also is targeting this impediment of self-dislike. That is to begin to explore, to even be willing to begin to explore, opening to it, accepting it, the love and compassion of our benefactors from such a moment, beyond all judging, beyond all limiting perception of you, is to acknowledge something in you that is worthy of such love, that draws that love, that is our fuller potential beyond all the reductive images, our fuller personhood. And to the degree that we learn through such practice and further progressive stages of it, to return or re-inhabit that fuller personhood, from that place, then we can relate to others similarly. We sense them as more than what all of our thoughts are making of each other, and resonate with that fuller being of them, and can more naturally wish them deeply well, very simply, very open-heartedly, not so caught. Oh, I don't know if I want to have that kind of a wish for this person. I just don't like the way they look to me. She's a little too needy. You know the type, right? Like from the story of Lucy. Not so caught like that. Sensing there's just a lot more to everybody, and learning to rely on that much more. Relying on that much more-ness of everybody, much more than our own reactions, which we have learned increasingly to distrust because they capture no one. They pretend to know everyone and they know no one. Starting with those closest to us, our own spouses and children, everybody else, the more familiar our own reductive labels and images, even for those closest to us, so that the moment we see them, we have our own reductive label. That's just my wife. That's just my kid. We've already lost much more of the mystery and fullness of who they are. It's already been lost. So even the more familiar, even the closest, the more our minds pretend to know and don't know them. Okay, so those were the first two impediments. Mistaking our thoughts of everyone for the beings, and the problem of self-dislike, self-loathing, feeling unworthy, which, if it isn't dealt with, will impede our ability to actually be a really beneficial presence for others as we intend in social service and social change work, right? Okay, so that was a fair amount to cover for the first hour. So how did it go with the first meditation exercise? Could many of you identify a benefactor moment, a moment when it's really a moment when you were really happy to be near somebody and happy to recall that moment and could then bring that moment into the meditation? How many felt like you could do that? There's no judgment, but I'm just wondering. Okay, so typically it'll be challenging for a number of us when first introduced. But it's not because, and also it may happen that what you may think, well, that's because I really haven't had much love in my life, so this must be for other people, it's not for me. But that's not really what I'm saying at all. Even a person who's grown up in the most difficult conditions, still, if they are still alive, there have been people around somewhere who looked upon that person with affectionate regard. And there have been many little moments when that has come up, even with strangers or others. But if somebody also just is struggling with initially engaging the practice, I always say also you can bring to mind a pet as well. Your feeling of loving affection for your dog or your cat or other pet, that can also be a beginning. Still a living being. Okay, so what sort of benefactor moments came to mind or benefactors came to mind? Anyone who's willing to share, it doesn't have to be super personal and difficult. Just anybody who may have come to your mind, that also becomes triggering for others, helping to recall who may appear in our own lives that we haven't thought of yet. And then also the space is open also for questions and observations as well. Okay, yeah.
Hi.
I think the mic is coming to you.
Hi. First of all, I want to thank you very much. And that was actually quite powerful for me because the benefactor who came was a woman that I had minimal interaction with as a child, someone who taught a gardening class when I was young, and just took a couple moments after the class to show me something extra. So it was not those loving, kind presences that were in my life. This was just a little tiny snapshot. And what I got to see was that, and it sort of came in like that must be what almost like a kaleidoscope. That if there was that one little tiny moment, how many
Yeah.
millions and millions of drops that there are.
Yeah.
And that's why it was just so incredibly powerful. And I was able to really draw it in and stay with it because I was aware of it not being an isolated incident and
Yeah.
aware that I didn't have to be, do, or anything just for that moment to occur and that absolute pure affection to be given. So it was really, really, really wonderful. And I recognize too that in those moments when perhaps I have been able to do the same, those have been the times when perhaps I laid down at night and recalled the perfect moment in the day. It was when I was able to do the exact same thing that was done for me.
Yeah, so what you're calling the perfect moment for me is some moment that approximates who we really are and the reason why we're alive as human beings.
Yeah.
It's starting to really somehow, the sense of, oh, that's more like what I really meant to be, happened.
And I really fully recognize what you said earlier, and that is that without a mindfulness practice, I'm not so sure that I would be able to recognize those moments.
Right.
It's only after practicing those moments that they come more freely.
Right, and so that's the way the progressive stages of practice unfold. Part of it is, I'll do another meditation exercise before we finish, but it goes through progressive stages in which we are re-imprinting again and again, and in moments of connection, which seems to trigger for most people the ability to remember more such moments, like you were already describing from the first one. And therefore the sense that what we're actually doing through the practice is not merely some foreign instruction, but a getting more in touch actually with reality. This is part of the reality that we're in, and also more in touch with that reality as operative in our lives. This power of loving compassion has been operating through our lives in ways we just were not conscious of. We've, as you said, we've also been participating in it. We have been the benefactor in many benefactor moments as well. So the other pole of it can also, we can recall more and more, and it gives us more of a compass on how to progress or unfold more. So others, another example of a benefactor from a benefactor moment, or a question or observation. Feel free.
Well, thank you for the exercise. It started with thoughts of my sister when I was an adolescent, who unexpectedly knew about my adolescent turmoil and behaved in a way that satisfied need at the time. But as the previous person was talking, I thought of moments when I have been my own benefactor.
Moments when you've been your own benefactor.
Yeah, and gotten past the habits of the reductive labels.
Yeah.
And allowed me to be fuller. And it was a very rich experience.
Good. Thank you. Others? Another example of a benefactor from such a moment, or questions before we go on? Yes. So back a few rows.
Hi, thank you. When I was a child, we had family in Virginia. We used to visit every summer, and I had cousins, and we just played and laughed the whole week. It was such a wonderful experience. I mean, every day we laughed, and that came to mind for me.
Yeah. Great. Excellent. Other examples? The more that we hear, the more evocative it is. Haven't you noticed that? The sister who was present as an adolescent, the moment seems like a random moment with somebody helping you with a playing all week with one's cousins. What else comes to mind? That's a benefactor moment. Yes, there's one there.
The moment that came to my mind was about 8 years ago. I was at a retreat with Dr. Will Tuttle.
With?
Dr. Will Tuttle, he's an author of the World Peace Diet book.
Mm-hmm.
And I was having issues with I was a teacher, and I was having trouble with certain students who just seemed beyond my reach.
Yeah.
And I had asked him, how do we deal with situations like this?
Mm-hmm.
And he's a tall man, probably over 7 feet.
Even taller than me.
And
Yeah.
and I'm but 5 feet.
Yeah.
And he came down on his knees. And he just looked at me in the eyes and he said, Shanti, just pray for them. Just keep praying for them.
Mm.
And I just felt the total love. And
Great, thank you. Wonderful example. Okay, are we ready for another impediment to love and compassion, and then leading up to another little meditation exercise? Okay? Why am I talking about impediments so much? It's just because when I name an impediment, it can help us understand more the principle of the meditations we're entering into, what it is that they're targeting, what is it that they help undercut, and thereby help bring out. So the first impediment was our tendency to mistake our own thoughts of each other for each other, which we're doing almost all the time. Second, and that's a huge impediment, right? Second impediment is including thoughts of oneself. Then second impediment was this feeling of dislike or self-loathing or unworthiness that many of us, at least in the West, tend to carry around for some reason, which will color everything, make us tend to be reactive, defensive, and very hard to be present in a very simple, open-hearted way with others. The third impediment, very common, is our aversion to many of our own feelings. As our desire not to feel many of the feelings that we have. So I want to bring this up in a special way. What would be more obvious as an impediment would be to say that there are many people and situations that I really hate, and that's a real impediment for me to feel very much loving compassion for them. Right? That seems pretty straightforward. But I'm wording this a somewhat different way, because our aversion, our feelings of dislike or hatred or whatever, our aversion to many persons and situations which impedes our compassion is largely an aversion to our own feelings. We think that we are feeling aversion for other people, but remember what I said earlier, we're mistaking our own thoughts for them. Similarly, the feelings that come up when we're around somebody, we then mistake as somehow them or given by them. Don't we? So we pull away from them, thinking that in that way we're pulling away from these difficult feelings that have been triggered around them. So our aversion to other persons and situations, which impedes compassion, of course, is largely an aversion to our own feelings, not to them. It's to our feelings which we associate with them. The feelings that our impressions of others trigger in us. the feelings that are impressions of other persons trigger in us. We feel aversion to those feelings in us. We think it's aversion to them. Therefore, to profoundly befriend our own feelings is a key to befriending others. And unless we are entered into some way of profoundly befriending our own feelings, we cannot really befriend others well, because we will continue to feel aversion to our own feelings that are impression of them triggering us. Unless we can befriend all of our own feelings, including those that others, our impressions of others triggering us, we cannot be a friendly presence to them. Is that clear? So one more assertion. Again, I'm speaking as kind of a Buddhist, a Buddhist scholar, but the power in our mind to host our own feelings with kindness and compassion is the same power that can host others and their feelings with kindness and compassion. The power in our mind to host our own feelings with kindness and compassion is the same power that can host other persons and their feelings with kindness and compassion. And without the former, we can't really do the latter. We may have some ideal of being a big help, but we are caught. So in this innate compassion training, and this also shares much with the fundamental theory and practice of mindfulness. In mindfulness of feelings, we are learning to host our feelings with a fundamental kindness and compassion to them. That's basic mindfulness practice. Here within this innate compassion training, using benefactor moments, the power to host our feelings with compassion and to extend that same compassion to others is being brought out through the framework of benefactor moments. And that is our next meditation exercise. Are you game? Okay. So we'll just go another step, take it a little bit further. Those of you, of course, the content of the meditation begins with recalling a moment that makes us happy to recall with someone, anywhere. Just a moment, not looking for a perfect person. Doesn't matter. We have no interest in finding perfect people or saintly people. That's of no relevance here. We're just finding a moment. Because that moment connects us with our capacity, which is a capacity to also sense others and their underlying capacity. So we just need the moment. So those who initially had some challenge in finding a benefactor moment, maybe try again. Or you can think of a pet, or maybe the direction that you began thinking was a little too loaded. Maybe you thought, I'm supposed to think of my mother, but I didn't get along with my mother very well, so now I'm struggling and struggling. So don't do that then. So think of somebody else to begin the practice. You can come back to your mother another time. Okay? So let's again take a deep breath, deep into the abdomen. Hold it just briefly. And when exhaling, just imagine that all your worries are clearing away to whatever extent you can. And repeat a few times. now recall a benefactor moment that makes you happy to remember. And imagine that that person or being is present to you now, just like that. And imagine that they are communing with you in the goodness of your very being, beyond any narrow judgments, beyond any limiting perceptions of you, connecting to the goodness of your very being and just wishing you deeply well. Just explore opening to that, just allowing that to whatever extent you can. Loved in your very being. Imagine the loving energy of their wish as like a shower of just gentle energy that bathes your whole body and mind. Explore just accepting that loving energy into your whole being. Like a puppy passively lying on a rug in the sunlight, just accepting it. Receive this loving energy into every part of your body, letting each area of tension soften a little under its touch. Receiving that energy into every cell, all the way down to your fingertips and toes. Every part of you loved in its very being. And explore opening and receiving this gentle, loving energy into every part of your mind, into every feeling of worry or tension or unhappiness, into any feelings of difficulty or unease or sadness or longing or happiness. Just receiving this loving energy into all of your feelings, whatever may be arising. every part of you loved in its very being. And now just let go of any visualization or framework and just merge into oneness with that gentle energy. Letting the mind relax, release all frameworks, and just fall totally open. With all senses wide open, and the mind completely unconfined, unrestricted, totally open. Just letting be. And letting all feelings and thoughts and sensations be embraced in this compassionate space of deep allowing, accepting, and letting all be. Gong. So it's a quite remarkable, powerful way to begin to experience all of one's feelings as profoundly befriended, held in absolute compassion. Again, I'm not making up these exercises exactly. They are adapted, so people from any background can connect. But I am adapting them from Buddhist devotional practices. So there's a lot of experience behind them, more than may meet the eye. They're also not restricted to just thinking about them in terms of Buddhism. They may, for a devout Christian, for example, or Jew, point back right into their own spiritual formation. Many Christians that I've taught this practice to have said things like, oh, grace is real. This is grace. This is what grace is. I've even had one say, oh, this is what the communion of saints was about. This kind of thing. It doesn't mean that we're just equating these very different traditions. It means they're being sent back into their own tradition with a fresh look. When they speak that way, I, as a Buddhist, in turn, get great inspiration back into my tradition. You follow? This isn't just tolerance of religious others. Impediment number 4, related to the practice we just did also, is the tendency in the mind to cling to a narrow cognitive focus on self that implies a separation or unrelatedness between self and others. A narrow focus on self, cognitive focus on oneself, that implies a separation or unrelatedness between this self, which is me, and all the others. So that there seems to be a great divide or chasm between this self and all the others in their selves, which somehow I have to keep figuring out how to bridge. So in this mode of compassion training and drawing on the framework of benefactor moments to help with it, in the last phase of the meditation, of every meditation, in all the progressive steps of it, like the last phase of the meditation we just did, there is a great releasing, a letting go of frameworks. Remember that instruction? Okay, at this point, let go of any visualization, let go of any frameworks by just merging into oneness with that loving energy. And just deeply letting all be. This is a kind of an open awareness in which the fixation on our reductive thoughts of persons relaxes. And we can experience our thoughts of self and others as not fully defining them. The instruction was not to try to stop thoughts or feelings or sensations from arising. That was not the instruction. We're not told to try to stop it. Not at all. In fact, we were instructed that let the thoughts and feelings and sensations just be embraced by this compassionate space of absolute acceptance, deep acceptance, and allowing and letting be. Let them arise. Let thoughts, feelings arise, absolutely, even more freely, much more freely. So freely, it's hard for them to string together into reductive chains of thinking. They're arising with such freedom. So this opens a space of wisdom to sense our fuller personhood and our underlying unity with others, to sense directly how our own thoughts are not fully defining of anything or anyone, without really rejecting them, just by letting them be. Still, they have some usefulness. Thinking, thoughts, we need them. I needed to find my way to this room. I needed to know there was a road, that I could walk on the road, that the road would lead somewhere. Those are all concepts and thoughts. We need them. They're just not fully defining of everything. The road's not just a road. The road is a place where a lot of other creatures and animals live underneath it, and water floods it, and there are all kinds of things going on. And this isn't just the library. This is a place where all kinds of creatures are flying in and out, and all kinds of things are happening. Meaningful encounters and meetings and connections and so forth. It's not only books. And then even what does library mean? So the point is that our basic concepts and thoughts are not capturing the full reality, but they still can have a usefulness. But it's a profound thing to begin to experience our own thoughts that we've mistaken for ourselves and others as not fully defining of anyone. They can have some usefulness. I'm a professor, they say. That has usefulness. If I walk in front of a class, it's important that the students know that the person who just stepped in front of their class is supposed to be there. It's someone designated professor, right? It has usefulness. But it's not fully defining of me. It may occur to students in my class that maybe I'm only a professor, not a father, not a pet owner, husband, all the struggles of life, relations to family, relations to many other people. So it's almost infinite what any person is. So that obviously, one concept, one thought is not fully defining. We have been mistaking our thoughts of each other as fully defining. That's the problem. Not that we have thoughts, but that we mistook them as the full definition of reality. That's the mistake. And this practice then, which again is being drawn out of Tibetan Buddhism, and it's deeply in accord with other practices in Chan and other forms of Buddhism, Pure Land and so on, is a moment of kind of great release, which the loving energy, the moments of loving connection, communion, loving energy, actually help empower the mind to finally just let go. And some of you may have even begun to experience that. If I had begun the instruction by saying, okay, let go, let everything be, do it. You people, let everything be, start now. That's not, I can't do it. Just letting go, letting be, letting go of all frameworks. Somehow the loving energy is empowering us finally to let go of the frameworks of separation, the frameworks of an absolute chasm between me and all the others, letting go into an underlying unity. In which we can experience our thoughts now as relative or conventional rather than final, full, and ultimate. Still useful, and not actually defining of anybody. And that's a space of freedom for more love and compassion. The freedom for more love and compassion to come out. Freedom to connect more from one's own fuller being, fuller personhood, to others' fuller personhood, fuller being. A bit allowing more of the mystery that is, in fact, here, to be here. And that's the connection between wisdom at the level that I'm now talking about it, and love and compassion. The more love and compassion, more of the energy of that and the power of that, the more power for the mind to release its grip on its reductive clinging. The more that the mind begins to release its grip on its own reductive thoughts and reactions and feelings, just relax that grip, the more a greater space of freedom is now available for this underlying capacity of love and compassion now to come out more, to feel people more, like this doctor guy who went down on his knees so he'd be closer to your level of height and just said, pray for them. So just the more increasing naturalness that of course you would be praying for everybody, saying the metta chant of loving kind. Of course that's the way to be. How lost I've been for not being able to just come back to that and abide in that more and more and more. What other way is there to be? So the sense of loving compassion, the deep sense of it, is freed up to take expression in that space of freedom, which is increasing wisdom, recognizing our own thoughts as merely relative. Functional. Some of them are functional. Some dysfunctional. Better, more discernment for which are functional, which are dysfunctional. Since they don't define anybody anyway, in any final way, don't have to be that committed even to our own thoughts or ideologies. They might be skillful means, or they might not. Can have a little more freedom to explore that. So this fourth impediment is the tendency in the mind to cling to our narrow sense of separation, an isolate, separate self over here, separate from all of the others over there, with the mind then oriented to try to figure out how am I supposed to bridge this separation. It's like showing up at a big cocktail party or party. Have any of you ever done that? And you're trying to figure out who you're supposed to be and how you're going to relate to all these people, these great foreigners or aliens on the other side of the chasm of reality. That's what I mean by this narrow cognitive sense of separation between self and others. It's not real. It's being made up in thought moment to moment. There could be a very simple, open-hearted simplicity of being present to each other that just is not caught like that, couldn't there? Haven't we all experienced that in little moments? That greater simplicity with a child, with a puppy, with someone. They're available. So the meditation practices of compassion and wisdom are ways to deepen into our fuller humanity, the humanity we've already been experiencing all along. But now with attention, focus, zeroing in, laser beam-like, this is what, have to deepen in this. Not be endlessly caught in distraction and confusion, caught in what so much of my world is caught in. Can take more responsibility to learn to become more stable in my fuller humanity in a way and the sign of that is that I'm sensing others in their fuller humanity. That is the sign of it. That means greater respect for others, more of a sense of their mystery, more affection for them, not grand displays of affection, but just sensing it. So that you feel like you would drop to your knees before them. If we saw anybody properly, like we would drop to our knees. That story about the lecture was so poignant that way. If we saw beings properly, it's like we would drop to our knees out of reverence and awe and deep well-wishing, like the end of Lucy's story. Final impediment. Actually, I have more impediments, but no time for all these impediments. But the final impediment I'll raise up is, and this is very much related to the possibility of empowering more and more compassion. A big impediment is we just don't like suffering very much. And we don't want to be present to our own suffering or others' suffering, right? I mean, that seems like it's a problem in regard to having compassion for persons, because compassion is this deep empathic concern and wish for them to be free of suffering. It means that we're present to their suffering. We're very aware of their suffering, and yet wish them kind of a deep freedom and deep well-being, and in turn, we're not hiding from their suffering. So authentic compassion is really being present to suffering. But the problem is, and this is the impediment, we don't like suffering, do we? So we don't want to be present to suffering. Isn't that a problem? You see the problem? Okay. But part of that problem is that when we feel ourselves suffering or when we empathize with others' sufferings, we have a tendency to experience the suffering as the final reality. We're afraid of suffering because we think it's the final reality here. If we experience the kind of suffering that is interwoven with our being and the suffering of others, we feel as if that's it. We are caught in the depth and the darkness of being. That is the final reality. That's part of our fear. And that really contributes to feelings of burnout and empathy fatigue for anybody who works with and for others in healthcare, in therapy, counseling, social service, ministry, teaching. We finally can't take it anymore, being so involved with others people's suffering and our suffering from our reactions to their sufferings, and we're taking the suffering to be the final definition, the final reality. Then we're just going down a sinkhole. Have you ever felt that way? Yes, okay, some of you are raising your hands. In these meditations, which are adapted from devotional traditions, as part of the tremendous profundity of these devotional traditions in Buddhism, and I would say also in other traditions, other contemplative traditions. Part of the profundity is that we are learning to experience our suffering feelings as not the final reality here. Rather, we experience our suffering feelings as embraced in a larger reality of compassionate awareness. It is that larger reality of compassionate awareness that is the final word. Our suffering is not. This is the deep intuition of the devotional threads of practice within each of the major religious traditions. Our own experience of suffering is not the final reality here. There is a much greater reality here, and that is connoted, that is being expressed and being connoted in our own experience, by experiencing our suffering feelings, our feelings of fear and anxiety and worry and loss and isolation and grief and sadness and despair and anger and self-loathing and all the feelings, they're all invited to be felt. The practice is inviting all feelings, even subconscious feelings that we were afraid to feel. We didn't know how we would handle the feelings below our feelings, are permitted and gently allowed and invited to come up as they come up over time with progressive practice, repeating practice, because those feelings are held in a larger reality, which is the reality of absolute compassion, which is the compassion of wisdom, which is a wisdom which is in touch with the reality, which is more fundamental than any feelings. And this is the reality that, this would be analogous to the reality that Christians and Jews and others would call God. That this is the reality that many Buddhists would call the fundamental Buddha nature, Dharmakaya, Amitabha Buddha, or the very nature of our mind, the very ground of our being, our own primordial, most fundamental awareness is the very ground of absolute compassion, if we can find our way home to it. Okay. So that was the presentation. Thank you. I think there are just like 3 minutes left. So if there are questions or things that you'd like to raise for just a minute or 2 or 3, then please feel free. Or have I stunned you? Stunned into silence and disbelief. Yes?
I do have one question. What if one is dealing with an abuser? And not just the gross abuser, somebody who's physically or verbally or emotionally abusive,
Yeah.
but even the more subtle abusive, somebody who's kind of using you, taking advantage of your good nature. What if that person's a family member, so it's not so easy to walk away?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I mean, these kinds of directions of practice are completely relevant to that. I mean, what's necessary in all circumstances, including circumstances of abuse, is just getting more and more in touch with reality, more and more grounded in what really is, what people really are, what oneself really is, what others are doing, how oneself gets caught in various dysfunctional, misperceiving, mistaking our own perceptions of others for the people, trying to get things out of them because of a deep sense of incompleteness, an incompleteness that can never be filled except by getting much more deeply in touch with our deeper humanity, our deeper potential. In understanding more and more of that in ourselves, then we're getting a very vivid, direct look into what everybody else is caught in. And if there's an abusive family member, a better sense of what they're doing and why they're doing it, and how one may need to defend oneself, but can also learn to do so with compassion, aware of how the people are caught. Not just they have now been reduced to my reductive thought of them in reaction to their reductive thought of me, so we're all lost and caught in a hole of mirrors from which we can never get out. There needs to be some process that much more deeply grounds us than that, through which we also see our own unconscious strategies to try to get and own and possess and control and use, from which we can sense from the inside better and better how the others around us are caught. And when it comes to an abusive family member, then really knowing them better and better from the inside, and therefore empowered to stand up to them, but not just in a way that's, again, the further extension of the dysfunction, but with some compassion. But that may also, just as a practical matter, may require the family member to move away for some period of time. It's hard to disentangle right in the middle of the situation, and so on. So there's 1,000 practical considerations that also come in that have to do with family life and so forth. 1 more minute. Any other questions? Okay, is that enough for today? Thank you all.
Just want to let you know we still have 4 copies left. If anyone want to purchase one, you can come and purchase one. And I believe Professor John would love to sign for you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.